John Dingell and I, Mr. Speaker, have not always agreed on every single issue, and I know that that's clearly come to the forefront from probably people on both sides of the aisle. But one of the interesting things that I've observed is that alliances regularly shift around here. In the early 1990s, there was a clash that Mr. Dingell and I had over the issue of jurisdiction. I was charged by then Speaker Gingrich early on to bring about a modification in committee jurisdiction. And I did some things that my friend John Dingell didn't particularly like. But when I talk about how alliances shift, I have to say that then just a few years ago, Mr. Dingell approached me and asked me to help him as he was dealing with a jurisdictional challenge, and I totally agreed with what it was he was trying to do at that point. And so as you look at a long period of time, while we can have passionate disagreements, it's clear that we can just as passionately come together and agree on some issues. John Dingell is clearly an institutionalist. And I told him last night, Mr. Speaker, at the great ceremony in Statuary Hall, that I've always been struck. I've served in almost every capacity one can on the House Rules Committee, just upstairs on the third floor. And as all of our colleagues know, this is where members come to testify on behalf of amendments or proposals that they would like to have considered on the House floor.
You yield the gentleman another 2 minutes.
You
may proceed.
I thank my very good friend for yielding me additional time. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in the Rules Committee, members have to stand in line to offer their testimony. And sometimes if questions go on, we don't impose limits there on questioning, as is the case in other committees. Often one person can be there and testify for a long period of time if the questioning goes on. Well, we will have maybe two-term, second-term members come in, and they will get antsy and start to pace around and grumble over the fact that they're not immediately being recognized before the Rules Committee to testify in behalf of the legislation. And I will say that I have been regularly struck at the fact that John Dingell, the Dean of the House, the Chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, has often come before the House Rules Committee and literally sat patiently for 45 minutes, an hour and a half, as others have gone before him to testify, never thinking for 1 second that he should be recognized. Now, of course, I should say parenthetically that when I was chairman of the Rules Committee, I always wanted to rush to recognize John Dingell just as quickly as I possibly could. But his understanding of this institution is to me evidenced in what he regularly did when I would see him in that capacity in the House Rules Committee. And I have to say that he talked about staff members last night and recognizing the people who give us the opportunity to do the work that we do is something that John Dingell did so well. And he, of course, talked about his wonderful partner, Debbie. So I have to say, Mr. Speaker, this job has a tendency to become very frustrating. When you've gone from the majority to the minority, and Mr. Dingell knows this, it is frustrating and challenging and difficult. But I'm in the minority now, and some of the days aren't as exciting as they were when I was in the majority. But to be able to be here on the day that recognizes John Dingell's amazing service to this institution is something of which I'm very proud and has given me just the boost that I need. So thank you very much, and I thank my friend for yielding.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Peters, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would now like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Donna Edwards.
Gentlewoman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I am a junior member of the House of Representatives, and I'm very pleased to join you, Mr. Speaker, in this recognition, I know that there are a lot of old friends in the House of Representatives. But, Mr. Speaker, I hope that Mr. Dingell will count me as one of his new friends. 19,420 days. I can't even imagine having only served in this House for a mere 7.5 months. And today, I think, Mr. Speaker, we value more than just the longevity of the service, but we value its character, its quality, its substance, and its leadership. And so I am really pleased to be here today, Mr. Speaker, in celebration of a wonderful time of public service in this institution. And I want to share with you that when I arrived in this Congress, Mr. Speaker, there was one gentleman who pulled me aside in the members' cloakroom, and he said to me something that I won't forget and I believe will carry many of our junior members through our time in service. Mr. Dingell said, "You are my peer, and don't you ever forget that, because it will serve you well in this institution." And already that's been true. Now, we talk a lot about the substance of the legislation that Mr. Dingell has ushered through for all of us, for my parents, my grandparents, for me. But I'd like to talk to you about what it means to be a member, because very recently, Mr. Dingell approached me about a situation with a group of high school students from Wyandotte High School in Michigan who were staying in Hershey, Pennsylvania, but had to play in the inauguration. And it would have been impossible for them to get to the inauguration on time. And so we found a high school out in the 4th Congressional District in Maryland for these students from Wyandotte. And what that demonstrated to me again, Mr. Speaker, is that Mr. Dingell isn't simply about the substance and about the time, but the service. Would you yield a minute?
Happy to yield an additional minute, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman is recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you. But isn't simply about that substance, but it's also about what it means to serve the people. And sometimes that service comes in small ways, and other times it comes in big ways. And so already, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Dingell has demonstrated to me that we're here for the public service, and that means to our constituents in Michigan, in Maryland, and across this country. But we can't forget that. And so I thank Mr. Dingell for his longevity and for his knowledge and the breadth, but also for teaching me a lesson as a junior member of this institution about what it means to serve. And I yield the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Peters, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would now like to yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Michigan very much. I think that this is just an incredibly appropriate moment to be honoring Mr. Dingell, because he is the living link to the principles of fairness and justice and advancing the public interest that animated the New Deal, and which remains so relevant today to the important issues which we are discussing here, not only on the floor of the House, but all across America. The lessons of why we regulate Wall Street, why we ensure that those who control the finances of all the families in our country have to be watched with an eagle eye. Mr. Dingell, who ensured that our securities laws were rewritten to provide for the protection against insider trading, penny stock manipulation, civil penalties increased, the Market Reform Act, so many of the laws that are now going to be looked to ensure that we enforce against those who have abused the public trust. So while many people look at his work and the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Children's Health Insurance Act, North America's first international wildlife refuge, there are so many other areas, including the financial regulatory area, all of the telecommunications laws that have made it possible for us to have this revolution, which now has the words Google and eBay and Amazon and YouTube part of our vocabulary.